Let me tell you something most people get wrong about keto. Ketosis is not about eating low carb. It's not about chasing ketone numbers, and it's definitely not about starving yourself. Ketosis is about lowering insulin long enough for your body to finally unlock stored fat. And today I'm going to show you the specific foods that make that possible. The foods that help you stay in ketosis 247 without white knuckling your hunger. This is the real metabolic advantage. Let's break down the science. For decades, we were told that weight gain is a math problem, calories in versus calories out. But what if the real controller of your body fat isn't calories at all, but a single hormone silently directing every metabolic decision your body makes? That hormone is insulin, and it doesn't just manage blood sugar, it decides whether you burn fat or store it. Every time you eat carbohydrates, your blood glucose rises and your pancreas releases insulin. Insulin's job is protective. It escorts glucose out of the bloodstream and into cells, but it also sends a second, far more powerful message. Stop burning fat. The moment insulin rises, fat burning drops, not slightly, significantly. Studies in metabolic physiology have consistently shown that elevated insulin suppresses lipolysis, the very process that releases fat from your fat cells. In simple terms, when insulin is high, your body is locked in storage mode. And here's the shocking part. You can be eating fewer calories and still remain in fat storage mode if insulin stays elevated throughout the day. This is why so many people diet, restrict, exercise harder, and still feel stuck. They are fighting biology instead of understanding it. Insulin is not evil, it's essential for survival. But in today's modern food environment, it is chronically elevated. Refined carbohydrates, frequent snacking, sugary beverages, even healthy whole grains can keep insulin elevated from morning until night. Research from metabolic ward studies shows that even moderate carbohydrate intake can significantly raise insulin levels for hours. Now imagine that happening 3 meals a day plus snacks. Your body never gets permission to tap into stored fat. It never receives the signal that says, we're safe, burn the reserves. Instead, it hears, store more, prepare for more incoming glucose. Over time, cells become resistant to insulin signal. This is called insulin resistance. And when that happens, the pancreas produces even more insulin to compensate. Higher insulin, less fat burning. It becomes a cycle. Elevated insulin drives fat storage. Increased fat tissue worsens insulin resistance. The cycle tightens. According to global health data, insulin resistance is now one of the most common underlying metabolic dysfunctions worldwide, strongly associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and even cognitive decline. But here's the empowering truth. When insulin drops low enough and stays low long enough, your metabolism shifts. The liver begins converting fatty acids into ketones, alternative fuel molecules like beta-hydroxybutyrate, which can power your brain, muscles, and heart efficiently. This metabolic state is called nutritional ketosis, and it only happens when insulin is sufficiently suppressed. Clinical research on low-carbohydrate ketogenic diets consistently shows reductions in fasting insulin levels, improvements in insulin sensitivity, and increased fat oxidation. In other words, when insulin falls, fat burning rises. This is not theory, it is biochemistry. Fat cells contain stored triglycerides. To access them, the enzyme hormone-sensitive lipase must be activated. Insulin directly inhibits this enzyme. So the presence of insulin literally blocks the door to your fat stores. When insulin levels decrease, that door opens. Fatty acids are released into the bloodstream and transported to the liver. The liver transforms them into ketones. Your body transitions from a sugar burner to a fat burner, and something remarkable happens when that shift becomes consistent. Hunger decreases. Studies have demonstrated that ketogenic diets often reduce appetite-regulating hormones like green while improving satiety signals. People spontaneously eat fewer calories not because they are forcing themselves, but because their biology has stabilized. Energy levels become steady instead of swinging between spikes and crashes. Mental clarity improves as the brain utilizes ketones, which some researchers suggest may produce more efficient mitochondrial energy compared to glucose in certain contexts. When insulin remains low between meals, especially when snacking is eliminated, the body experiences longer periods of fat oxidation. This is why meal timing and food composition matter more than obsessively counting calories. It is the hormonal environment that dictates whether calories are burned or stored. Consider this. Two individuals can consume the same number of calories, yet the one with lower insulin exposure may burn more fat over time because their body has access to stored energy. This hormonal model of obesity, supported by decades of endocrinology research, reframes the entire conversation. It explains why processed carbohydrates are uniquely problematic, not because they contain calories, but because they provoke rapid and repeated insulin surges. It explains why constant grazing keeps metabolism stuck. It explains why lowering carbohydrate intake, prioritizing protein appropriately, and consuming natural fats can create a metabolic advantage. The goal is not zero insulin. That would be dangerous, but controlled, strategic insulin release that allows long windows of low levels. During those windows, your body repairs. It mobilizes fat. It restores metabolic flexibility. And metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch between fuel sources, is a hallmark of health. When insulin is chronically elevated, flexibility disappears. You become dependent on frequent carbohydrate intake. Cravings intensify. Energy dips become urgent. But when insulin is managed, something powerful returns: control. You are no longer chasing snacks to stabilize blood sugar. Your body is calmly using stored fuel. This is why simply reducing calories without addressing insulin often fails long term. Severe calorie restriction can slow metabolism, increase hunger hormones, and elevate stress hormones, all while insulin remains dysregulated if carbohydrate intake stays high. Lowering insulin through strategic carbohydrate reduction changes the hormonal landscape entirely. The body is no longer defending fat stores as aggressively. Instead, it accesses them. Fat becomes fuel. And when fat becomes fuel, the body no longer perceives a crisis. It perceives abundance because it is finally allowed to use its stored reserves. This is the metabolic shift that keeps someone in ketosis consistently. It is not magic. It is not extreme. It is physiology working as designed when insulin is no longer constantly elevated. And perhaps the most empowering truth of all is this: insulin responds rapidly to dietary change. Within days of lowering carbohydrate intake, fasting insulin levels can begin to decline. Within weeks, insulin sensitivity can improve. The body is remarkably adaptable when given the right signals. So if fat loss has felt impossible, if willpower has felt exhausted, if calories have been cut again and again with little reward, the answer may not be to eat less. It may be to lower insulin strategically and consistently. Because the real key to unlocking fat burning is not starvation, it is hormonal alignment. When insulin stays low long enough, the body does exactly what it was designed to do. It burns fat. For years, we were told to fear fat, to trim it off our plates, to replace it with grains, cereals, and heart-healthy carbohydrates. And yet, during the very decades we lowered fat intake, rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome exploded across the globe. Something didn't add up. What if the nutrient we were taught to avoid is actually the key to metabolic stability? What if fat is not the enemy, but the fuel your body has been designed to trust all along? Every cell in your body is built with fat. Your brain is nearly 60% fat by dry weight. Your hormones depend on cholesterol and fatty acids as structural building blocks. And when dietary fat is present in adequate amounts, especially alongside controlled carbohydrate intake, something remarkable happens. Blood sugar stabilizes. Unlike refined carbohydrates, fat does not spike glucose. It does not create a rapid insulin surge. It digests slowly, steadily, predictably. That steady digestion translates into stable energy. Think about the crash you feel after a high-carb meal, the post-lunch fog, the mid-after afternoon craving, the urgent need for caffeine or sugar. That roller coaster isn't a lack of willpower, it's physiology. Rapid glucose spikes trigger rapid insulin release. Insulin then drives glucose into cells, often overshooting, leading to a relative drop in blood sugar. That drop activates hunger hormones and stress hormones. You don't just want food, your brain perceives a fuel emergency. Now compare that to a meal centered on healthy fats and adequate protein. Research on low carbohydrate, higher fat dietary patterns consistently shows reduced glycemic variability, fewer spikes, fewer crashes. Stable glucose means stable insulin. Stable insulin means fewer emergency hunger signals. This is not about discipline. It's about hormonal calm. When fat becomes the primary fuel, your metabolism shifts toward fat oxidation. Studies using indirect calorimetry have demonstrated that individuals adapted to lower carbohydrate, higher fat diets burn a greater proportion of fat for energy even at rest. That means your body is not desperately waiting for the next carb refill. It is comfortably using stored energy. And here's the powerful truth. Fat is energy dense for a reason. Gram for gram, fat provides more than twice the calories of carbohydrates. That density is not a flaw. It is a survival advantage. For most of human history, stable high carbohydrate access did not exist. Our ancestors thrived on animal fats, wild fish, seasonal plants, and periods of food scarcity. The human body evolved to store fat efficiently and burn it efficiently. The problem today is not our ability to store fat. It's our inability to access it because insulin remains elevated too often. When dietary fat is reintroduced strategically and carbohydrates are lowered, insulin falls. With insulin reduced, hormone-sensitive lipase is no longer suppressed. Stored triglycerides break down into fatty acids. The liver converts some of these fatty acids into ketones, molecules like beta-hydroxybutyrate that cross the blood-brain barrier and fuel neurons. Many people report enhanced mental clarity in ketosis, and emerging research suggests ketones may provide a more stable fuel source for the brain under certain metabolic conditions. But this isn't just about brain energy, it's about appetite regulation. Fat influences satiety hormones such as cholecystokinin CCK, which signals fullness to the brain. Protein enhances peptide Y and GLP-1, further promoting satiety. When meals contain sufficient fat and protein, hunger often decreases naturally. Clinical trials comparing low-carb, higher-fat diets to low-fat diets frequently show greater satiety and spontaneous calorie reduction in the higher fat groups, even without intentional restriction. Imagine eating until satisfied and not thinking about food for hours. No mental battle, no internal negotiation. That stability is powerful. It frees cognitive bandwidth. It lowers stress. And stress itself is a metabolic disruptor. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which can raise blood sugar and promote central fat storage. When energy levels are steady and hunger is predictable, stress signals decrease. Stability compounds stability. Critics often worry about fat and heart health. Yet modern research distinguishes between processed trans fats and natural fats found in whole foods. Large meta-analyses have challenged the simplistic narrative that natural saturated fat alone directly causes heart disease. Instead, metabolic health markers, insulin resistance, triglyceride levels, HDL cholesterol, inflammatory markers appear far more predictive. Low carbohydrate, higher fat interventions frequently show reductions in triglycerides and increases in HDL, both associated with improved cardiovascular risk profiles. This doesn't mean unlimited processed fats or deep-fried foods are protective. Quality matters. Whole food sources such as fatty fish rich in omega-3 fatty acids, avocados high in monounsaturated fats, olive oil containing polyphenols, eggs packed with choline, and unprocessed meats provide structural nutrients alongside energy. When these foods replace refined carbohydrates, the metabolic landscape changes. Energy becomes stable not because calories disappear, but because hormonal chaos decreases. Fat slows gastric emptying. It moderates digestion. It prevents the sharp glucose peaks that trigger reactive hunger. That steady curve of fuel availability tells your brain we are safe, and safety biologically reduces the urgency to overeat. Another often overlooked factor is metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to switch between burning glucose and burning fat. In chronically high carbohydrate environments, flexibility diminishes. The body becomes glucose dependent. Miss a meal and fatigue sets in quickly. But when fat oxidation pathways are upregulated through dietary adaptation, the body becomes resilient. Skipping a meal no longer feels like an emergency. Stored energy is accessible. Athletic research has also shown that fat-adapted individuals can sustain endurance efforts with greater reliance on fat stores sparing glycogen. While performance contexts vary, the metabolic principle remains. When fat is trusted as fuel, dependency on constant carbohydrate intake decreases. And then there is inflammation. Excessive refined carbohydrate intake has been linked in numerous studies to increased inflammatory markers. Chronic inflammation contributes to insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. Diets emphasizing healthy fats, particularly omega-3 fatty acids, have been associated with reductions in inflammatory biomarkers. Lower inflammation supports better insulin sensitivity, which in turn supports continued fat burning. Stability beats willpower because biology always wins against psychology in the long term. You can override hunger temporarily. You can push through cravings for days or weeks. But if your hormonal signals scream for quick glucose, eventually compliance breaks. When meals centered on healthy fats and adequate protein stabilize those signals, you are no longer fighting your body. You are working with it. And that is the turning point. When fat is restored to its rightful role, not as an indulgence, not as an enemy, but as a primary energy source in the context of controlled carbohydrates, the metabolic noise quiets. Blood sugar steadies, insulin calms, hunger becomes predictable instead of urgent. Energy becomes consistent instead of volatile. This is not about extremes. It is about alignment. The human body is remarkably adaptive. When given steady fuel that does not provoke constant insulin surges, it transitions into a state where fat, both dietary and stored, becomes the dominant energy currency. And when that transition solidifies, something profound happens. Food stops controlling your day. Cravings lose their intensity. The cycle of spike and crash weakens. You move, think, and function with sustained clarity. Fat in the right context is not the cause of metabolic chaos. It is often the stabilizer. It is the fuel that burns slowly, cleanly, reliably. And when stability replaces volatility, long-term change stops depending on willpower and starts depending on physiology. Consistency is not glamorous. It doesn't trend. It doesn't promise overnight transformation. But in human biology, consistency is everything. Your metabolism does not respond to what you do once. It responds to what you repeat. Every meal, every day, every hormonal signal either reinforces fat storage or builds metabolic flexibility. And metabolic flexibility, the ability to seamlessly switch between burning glucose and burning fat, is one of the clearest markers of metabolic health. Right now, millions of people are metabolically inflexible. Research shows that insulin resistance affects a staggering portion of adults worldwide, many without even knowing it. In this state, the body struggles to switch fuel sources efficiently. It becomes dependent on frequent carbohydrate intake, miss a meal and energy crashes, skip a snack and irritability rises. This isn't weakness. It's biochemical dependency. When carbohydrates are consumed frequently throughout the day, insulin rises frequently throughout the day. And when insulin stays elevated, fat burning remains suppressed. Over time, cells respond less effectively to insulin signal. The pancreas compensates by producing more. Elevated fasting insulin often appears years before blood glucose becomes abnormal, long before a diagnosis, long before symptoms become obvious. Quietly, metabolism becomes rigid. But here is the extraordinary truth about the human body. It adapts to repeated signals. If insulin remains chronically high, the body adapts to store. If insulin is strategically lowered consistently, the body adapts to burn. This is not motivational theory. It is endocrine physiology. When someone adopts a low carbohydrate, adequate protein, healthy fat dietary pattern for a few days, ketone production may begin. But early ketosis is fragile. Glycogen stores are still present. Enzymes responsible for efficient fat oxidation are not yet fully upregulated. The body is transitioning. This is why consistency matters. Studies examining keto adaptation show that over several weeks, mitochondrial enzymes involved in beta oxidation increase. The machinery for burning fat becomes more efficient. The body doesn't just produce ketones, it becomes better at using them. This adaptation cannot occur in a start-stop pattern. Repeated carbohydrate spikes reset the hormonal environment. Insulin rises sharply, lipolysis slows, and the metabolic shift stalls. Consistency is what teaches the body that glucose is no longer the primary fuel. Consistency is what builds the enzymatic infrastructure for fat oxidation. And then something powerful happens. Hunger changes. Research on ketogenic and low carbohydrate interventions frequently reports reduced appetite and decreased spontaneous caloric intake after adaptation. Grain, often called the hunger hormone, can stabilize. Satiety hormones improve. Blood sugar variability declines. The dramatic peaks and crashes that once dictated mood and cravings begin to fade. This is metabolic flexibility emerging in real time. In metabolically flexible individuals, the body can access stored fat between meals without triggering emergency hunger signals. Energy remains stable even during longer gaps between eating. The brain, fueled partially by ketones, operates without the fog associated with reactive hypoglycemia. This is not anecdote alone. Clinical observations and controlled trials consistently show improved glycemic stability and fat oxidation after sustained carbohydrate restriction. Electrolyte balance plays a critical role in this adaptation. When insulin decreases, the kidneys excrete more sodium. This is a natural physiological response. Without adequate sodium, potassium, and magnesium, fatigue and headaches can appear. Many people misinterpret these early adaptation symptoms as failure, when in reality they are signs of transition. Consistency, paired with proper hydration and electrolyte support, allows the body to recalibrate. And here's what makes this transformation profound. Metabolic flexibility doesn't just affect weight, it influences inflammation, cardiovascular markers, and even cognitive performance. Elevated triglycerides, low HDL cholesterol, and high fasting insulin are strongly associated with cardiometabolic risk. Numerous low carbohydrate dietary studies show reductions in triglycerides and increases in HDL after sustained adherence. Insulin sensitivity improves. Fasting insulin decreases. These are not cosmetic changes. They are biochemical shifts. Consistency compounds results because the body is always responding to patterns. Think about skeletal muscle. With repeated resistance training, muscle fibers strengthen. With repeated inactivity, they atrophy. The same principle applies metabolically. Repeated exposure to high insulin conditions trains the body toward storage. Repeated exposure to low insulin conditions trains the body toward oxidation. But the modern environment rewards inconsistency. Weekday discipline followed by weekend indulgence. Short-term restriction followed by rebound. Each reset forces the body back into glucose dependence. Each spike reinforces metabolic rigidity. The cycle becomes exhausting. True metabolic change requires repetition long enough for the body to trust the new signal. When carbohydrate intake remains controlled, protein remains adequate to preserve lean mass, and healthy fats provide steady fuel. The body gradually increases mitochondrial efficiency. Studies examining endurance athletes adapted to low carbohydrate diets demonstrate significantly higher rates of fat oxidation compared to high carbohydrate counterparts. That is adaptation measured in oxygen consumption and substrate utilization. That is flexibility quantified. And flexibility brings freedom. Freedom from constant hunger. Freedom from the fear of missing a meal. Freedom from the mental noise of cravings every few hours. When the body trusts fat as fuel, fasting intervals become manageable. Energy during physical activity becomes stable. Even sleep quality may improve as nocturnal blood sugar swings decrease. Consistency also protects muscle mass when paired with adequate protein. Contrary to myths, well-formulated low-carbohydrate diets can maintain lean tissue while promoting fat loss, particularly when resistance training is included. Protein stimulates muscle protein synthesis. Lower insulin allows fat oxidation. The combination preserves strength while reducing excess fat mass. But perhaps the most emotionally powerful transformation is psychological. When energy is stable, decision improves. When hunger is predictable, discipline feels effortless. When inflammation decreases and blood sugar stabilizes, mood fluctuations soften. Consistency in nutrition creates consistency in cognition. Metabolic flexibility is not about perfection. It is about direction. Occasional variation does not erase adaptation, but repeated oscillation prevents it. The body requires time under stable conditions to recalibrate hormone signaling, enzyme expression, and fuel partitioning. And the science is clear on one point. Rapid extreme restriction without sustainability rarely produces lasting metabolic health. Sustainable patterns do. Repeated, steady, insulining choices build a biochemical environment where fat can be mobilized daily, not sporadically. Imagine a metabolism that seamlessly shifts from dietary fat to stored fat without distress. Imagine waking up without urgent hunger. Imagine working, training, living without constant glucose dependency. That is the promise of metabolic flexibility earned through consistency. Every meal is a signal. Every day reinforces a pathway. The question is not whether your body adapts. It always does. The question is what it adapts to. When you choose low carbohydrate intake consistently, prioritize adequate protein, include healthy fats, and maintain electrolyte balance, you are not following a trend. You are sending a repeated hormonal message. Insulin does not need to stay elevated. Fat stores are accessible. Energy is available. Given enough time under those conditions, the body responds exactly as physiology predicts. It becomes efficient. It becomes flexible. It becomes resilient. Consistency creates adaptation. Adaptation creates flexibility. And flexibility restores the metabolic freedom that modern life has quietly taken.